Hey everybody, this is Sophia Florence, one of the hosts of the Crumbling podcast, and I'm here to tell you that we have new tiers on Patreon. And I know what you're thinking. Do I want to pay more for this podcast? Hell yeah, because you're going to get some cool shit with it. Our early supporter tier is now one of the new ones. Obviously, we have the old Help Us Grow one, which is just $3 a month. That gives you access to our episodes early and gives you access to our special episodes called Crumbs. The early supporter tier, which is $6 a month, gives you early access to the episodes like the other one, gives you some exclusive behind-the-scenes content. So there will be clips, bloopers, more other things that we'll be adding to the Patreon. A physical sticker pack, which is fun and themed designs produced by our illustrator, Chris Terendi. Patreon-only updates and polls that'll help shape our future content. So that'll be really exciting if you want to kind of be more of an active participant in what we're doing here. And it's, just kind of a perfect thing for fans who want a sneak peek and exclusive goodies. There's some really fucking cool designs. I can't wait till y'all see them. If you want to go a little bit more than that, we have the super fan tier that is $20 a month. That gives you early access to all the episodes. It gives you those behind the scenes episodes and extras. It'll give you access to something that the other ones don't have, which is a limited edition t-shirt. We've got one right now. It's super cool. I am not even going to show it to you guys. Probably have more designs over the years. If you want the shirt, come get it. It's $20 a month for that. Ideal for anyone who loves merch. They want to, tell people about our podcast and they don't want to actually talk about it. Some of us are introverts. You don't want to talk about shit. You just want to be a billboard, and I'm cool with that. And also, it's the same art that's on the stickers. It is super rad, and 40% of the tier's proceeds go directly to supporting our illustrator's work. That is Chris Terendi. He's at Chris Terendi, Tirendi art.com. ChrisTerendiart.com. Give it a look. I hope that some of you will join, and I hope that you will take part in some polls and tell us what you want. We want to make the content that you want within the confines of the stuff that we like to do. Please go to our Patreon, patreon.com/The Crumbling Podcast, and join today. Hey everyone, welcome to The Crumbling. We are a podcast about how our sense of reality is doing that thing that is the name of the podcast, Crumbling. I am Sophia Florence. I'm one of your hosts, and I am here with one of my co-hosts.
Hello, it's me.
Our other co-host, Davin, is off doing whatever Davin does. Could be anything.
Davin things.
Yeah, could be training in a high-gravity environment, be cutting his own tail off.
Oh, geez.
Sorry, him and I were talking a lot about Dragon Ball Z yesterday, so I was just kind of throwing the Dragon Ball Z references at the wall. We are also joined again by Aly Wane. Super excited to have you back. How are you feeling?
Yeah, glad to be here, and I'm finally at the age when I'm old enough to, you mentioned Dragon Ball Z, and so now I'm contractually obligated to say, I get that reference. Like I'm not that old. Like I know what you guys are talking about. So very proud of that.
Excellent.
But really glad to be here and just to talk about all things politics. Things are insane. And you actually describing the name of the podcast, I didn't even know what it was in reference to. And I'm just like, oh yeah, you have a very appropriate name for this current era, The Crumbling, because I do think that we might be looking at like the decline of the American empire right now. And it's brutal. It's brutal.
Yeah. Honestly, when we were looking for a name, there was a bit of a longer search for what we were going to call it. I kept thinking of these much longer titles and I couldn't think of anything short and punchy. And then when I did, they were already taken. And so, a couple weeks had gone on and I was like, okay, well, like the goal was always to talk about the epistemic crisis, but that's not a very accessible term because then you have to be like, okay, this is what epistemology is. This is how the whole thing works. Right. And so I said, okay, well, what's like the simplest version of that? I have a friend who uses the term weaponized unreality, and I like that, but it's still a lot. And then, I hear people say post-truth, and that's okay, but I ended up landing on The Crumbling because I was like, oh, it's something that's falling apart. It's something that we once had some semblance of a shared sense of reality, even if people didn't know all the same things. We could agree at least on some things. And I was like, okay, but that's completely fallen apart. And so it's like, okay, what's, adjectives for falling apart? And we wound up on The Crumbling, and the cookie came afterwards. But that is a real cookie as our logo. My partner ate that cookie.
We're getting more lore here. That's
great. Yeah. And it was kind of funny because also it's one of the Cool Zone Media shows. It Can Happen Here, one of Robert Evans' shows. One of their co-hosts has referred to the time we live in as the crumbling world too. And I was like, oh, I really got lucky enough to hit the nail on the head a couple weeks early on that one. Yeah,
absolutely. Absolutely. Well, glad to be here.
We are going to talk about immigration again. I think that this segues so well with Imagine This is 2 weeks ago. And we had an interview with the philosopher David Livingstone Smith come out, who is a philosopher of dehumanization. Really rough thing to do an interview about. But David's is just continuously on point. It was, I felt like a slack-jawed idiot trying to have this conversation by the end. I think that topic and this topic segue really well into each other. We're going to start with just a real hot topic.
So, Aly, what common ground do you see between the struggle for immigrant rights in the United States and the struggle for human rights and freedom in Palestine?
Well, I mean, it's all about the problem of dehumanization versus kind of seeing everyone as human beings. One thing about myself is before I did this immigration rights work, I actually went to school at the University of Pennsylvania studying international relations. And I've been paying attention to Israel-Palestine for a long time. Probably my first protest on that was like 02, 03. And one of the things that I immediately understood just in some of my international studies classes was that depending on how much power a country has, the more human, quote unquote, their population is, and the less power that country has, and that's usually the global south, the less human that population is read. And when it came to Israel and Palestine, especially when I first started to really get into the issue and understood how long it's been going on and the amount of international human rights complaints against Israel with basically no consequences, I understood that with the Palestinians, what we were looking at is just this deep crisis of dehumanization of these people. They're just not seen as fully human. I mean, even the mainstream narrative discourse that we have about Palestinians today in this country is a deeply dehumanizing discourse. And obviously, the conversation about immigration is about setting up this distinction between citizen versus non-citizen. And in the big box framing, really what we're talking about is exactly what you're talking about. Citizens equal human, non-citizen immigrant seen as less than human, less rights. And I think those are the big connections. In terms of, if I could share some of my personal reflections on Gaza, I remember that in October 23, when I understood the damage that Hamas was able to inflict on Israeli civilians that week. I mean, I was just telling a friend, I'd forgotten about it, but I'm pretty sure that I started to panic. And for about 2 or 3 days, I was just anxiety ridden. And all I could think of, I had these visions of blood. By then, I had already done enough organizing on the issue, and I also already understood enough about the situation that I was given this Hamas attack on Israelis, and given the fact that Palestinians are already intensely dehumanized and Israel has been looking for any excuse to go after Palestinians. In some ways, I totally predicted everything that we've seen up to and including this unbelievably sadistic campaign that we are seeing right now, seeing even the quote-unquote aid process that they set up is a process that is actually helping them to kill more Palestinians, and those Palestinians that they don't kill are basically being captured to be forcefully deported, right? So even there's a connection, right? In terms of who belongs, who doesn't, that's also a question about immigration. And in fact, it's clear that society is in a war frenzy right now. There are a lot of Israeli leftists and peace activists who have been speaking out against this for years, fighting this under incredible duress. But there were polls that came out last week about the opinions of Israelis when it comes to Palestinians, and it is full on genocidal. I mean, something like 80% of them are okay with all Gazans being kind of expelled. A great majority of them are saying, yeah, we need to deport all of the Arabs who are in the West Bank as well. Now, one of Israel's big PR things has been basically saying oh, no, we actually treat Palestinians and Arab Americans within the country with dignity and blah, blah, blah. Now, of course, that's not true. We know about Israeli apartheid, but that's been an excuse. But now we've gotten to the point in the society where they're saying, oh, no, yeah, we want all of the Arabs in Israel to just be excluded, expelled, deported. And of course, the thing that's the most terrifying is that close to half of them We're basically okay with the IDF exterminating every Gazan that they've seen. We may not be at that level of dehumanization when it comes to the immigration conversation in this country. We're getting close. I hate, and certainly, especially as a Black immigrant, this is something I've been thinking about, but I've been telling people, especially since this inauguration, that this is the closest thing that I've experienced to what it must have felt like to live in earlier America with the Fugitive Slave Act, because I absolutely believe right now that this country is deeply dangerous to every single immigrant. And there's no distinction between legal, illegal. This country is on the hunt for immigrants. The Trump administration right now is not only deputizing more and more local law enforcement officials to be added, but they're in talks with this far-right group, the Proud Boys, about potentially adding them to these posses to go after immigrants.
That fucks me up so bad.
And all of that, it's insane.
As somebody who's taken conflict classes and read extensively about conflict, like that actually is the thing that really ends up scaring me. Any kind of local police cooperation with DHS generally. So that, God.
Yeah, I mean, it's bad. And given the fact that as of today, I don't see any serious organized response from the Democrats. And obviously, Trump just, whenever he sees an opening, he takes everything he can. So he keeps escalating. I mean, just this past week, the Supreme Court gave him the permission to basically delegalize 500,000 immigrants. 500,000 immigrants. That's insane. These are immigrants from Cuba, Venezuela, Haiti, and Nicaragua. Folks who have been here most under something called temporary protective status. Many of them have obviously, they've been here legally. They've started to establish themselves. Stroke of a pen, 500,000 immigrants completely delegalized, meaning that literally in the next couple of weeks or so, as long as that is upheld, these folks are going to have to figure out, do I continue to live here to try to continue establishing myself, which really would mean being like going into hiding, or do I need to pack up again and leave? That's 500,000 people. But unfortunately, under this current regime of cruelty, even that is just kind of like, yeah, that's just one of the bad stories today. So that just gives you a sense of it. But all of that is connected to the dehumanization process. Whether you're talking about Gaza, you're talking about immigrants, it's the same process of some people really not adhering to that basic philosophical principle of every single human being is equal and worthy of the same value. That's not true, unfortunately, in pragmatic terms.
Yeah, you mentioned there specifically talking about Arabs in Palestine. And that's a word used by the Israelis to kind of insinuate that the people that are of some Arabic descent in Palestine are not descended from that land, which one, it's not true. There's been genetic studies. People have looked into this time and time again. And it's one of the reasons that Israel does not allow Palestinians to get genetic tests, actually. They block them from getting non-health related genetic tests. It's not legal there.
Wow, I didn't know that. That's wild.
Yeah, it's something that I came upon a couple of years ago, and I had to ask why. And so I started digging around through papers, and I was like, it's because, when you get down to it, yes, Jews are descended from people in that area. They are descended from Canaanites. So are Palestinians. So are a lot of people from Lebanon. There's a lot of people that have blood ties to that land. And it's interesting to hear them referred to as Arabs because it kind of implies that they are from slightly outside of Levant region. And so it kind of brings me back to one of the things that we were talking about with Professor Smith, which he said when dehumanization happens, it almost always starts with racialization. You always have a group being made different with race. And one of the few examples that we could find that was sort of different from that, because you could see that as a through line, not only in the US, even with immigrants. When people talk about immigrants, they usually are not referring to European immigrants. People in the US do not think of European immigrants when they're thinking of immigrants.
Absolutely.
Not to say that those immigration laws don't affect European immigrants, but it's just that that's not what usually occurs to people. People usually think of people from the global South. There is a huge racialized component to that word. It's why they tend to spend a lot of time at the southern border instead of the northern. And even, when they're like, we've got ISIS members coming over the Mexican border. As far as I know, it's preposterous. Maybe that's happened. Who the hell knows? It feels ridiculous on its face. The one case where where that hadn't happened was really with trans people, where we didn't really need to be racialized, but there was some other component for us. It's always something that he referred to as people having both a physical and metaphysical threat to be compared to monsters. And so that's how you get that powder keg of people going to the next step. Because you could be non-human and not a monster, but the second you have those combinations of physical and metaphysical threat, you start to kind of cross a new threshold. I think people have been trying to establish in America for a long time this metaphysical identity of Americans as being the descendant of Europeans, and what counts as European changes every 40 years. They gradually add people to that. And at one point, a guy from India sued the U.S. government and was like, "Oh, I'm white actually."
I know which case you're talking about. Yeah.
Yeah, it's a wild piece of history there, but the idea that America is like this European homeland away from Europe is something that relies on, metaphysical ideas. When you say they're raping kids, whatever, all these other things that Trump, he just like got off that escalator and he was like, they're raping the kid. He really went in on that. Like that's, where people get that. For trans people, it's a little easier to get the metaphysical threat because trans people, to some people will, because of the appearance of being androgynous, for a lot of people, the assigned categories of male and female are like a metaphysical truth. They're like this is ordained by God. This is how things work. It must only be these two things. The second somebody defies that, they become a metaphysical threat. It's like if your cat talked to you, but a talking cat is not physically threatening, so it's fine. But all of a sudden, somebody defies these categories of things that don't necessarily coexist in one person. And Professor Smith referred to as like a werewolf. All you have to do is make people seem threatening. I think it's why prior to in 2016. When even Trump was not necessarily on the anti-trans train yet, and when they asked him about the bathroom bills, he was just like, whatever, who gives a shit? People pee where they pee. And all of a sudden, you get guys like Chris Rufo coming in and being like, no, we need to start talking about trans people being physically threatening. And so then they were like, oh, like look at trans people in sports. Look at Fallon Fox. Look at I think Fallon Fox was really the first of it, which is tragic because she's a fucking wonderful person. I've known her since like 2012. Mm-hmm. She's one of those people that if you're trans and you like add Fallon Fox on social media, she'll talk to you. She's just like a regular ass person, even though she was like also like the first trans fighter in UFC, and she was somebody that's very open about her experiences. Very fucking cool human being. So.
By the way, I happen to be connected with the partner of Pat Manuel, who is actually a trans boxer as well, of some level of success.
Yeah.
But the thing I keep, in terms of everything you've been saying, I keep thinking about this concept of dehumanization and how really it's about policing borders around essentialized concepts of purity. Because when it comes to trans folks, really people are afraid of them crossing those essentialized gender borders. And I think that is what scares people on that kind of level, because you're just taught to think in these like simple binaries. Mm-hmm. And when people are just saying, well, actually, I'm just different, like I don't go by that binary, for a lot of people, unfortunately, that is seen as threatening. But I also, in terms of bringing all these threats together, the thing that keeps coming back to me, and this is going to the concept of the crumbling and reality and everything, like media has a huge role in all of this, whether you're talking about anti-trans media that exaggerates, the crimes of migrants, media that demonizes Palestinians. It's not like people come out of the womb with these very kind of conservative, essentialized notions around migration and all of those things. It's just that you're taught these things, that they're amplified by, a powerful conservative media that tends to essentialize these things, and that tends to create that monster. It creates the werewolf, or whatever you want to call it. And then people think then that they know, like, oh, I know what trans people are like, or I know what immigrants are like, or I know what Palestinians are like. I'm thinking about that a lot because a lot of these past couple of days, I genuinely have been asking myself deep questions about the process of dehumanization. What gives people the permission to stop considering other people as actually real? I just cited all the polls about how Israelis, are thinking about Palestinians. While there is quite a bit of a back and forth around the right and wrong of the war, Israeli media largely tries to hide what is actually happening in Gaza, or what's happening happening, in the West Bank or anything. So the media plays a huge role in creating this atmosphere of self-righteousness and dehumanization. You're more likely to hear about like an IDF soldier being injured than you are to hear about just the incredible cruelty that we're seeing. I mean, just a couple of days ago, the UN put out a statement where they said that massive food aid wasn't given to Gazans, that within 48 hours, there was a possibility of 14,000 Palestinian babies who could die. And that time came and went. And I mean, that's a level of psychopathic dehumanization that Israelis are okay with it. And that certainly our power structure is largely okay with it. Like we've seen the continuity between Biden and Trump on Gaza. And a lot of that has to do with media. I think that I first found out about what was actually going on in Palestine, the occupied territories, all of that stuff. I found out about it when I met some of my first Palestinian activists in the early 2000s. By then, I had already become like the news junkie that I still am. I read New York Times, Washington Post, all of those things. I knew nothing about the occupation of Palestine because it wasn't really discussed. So even just here, media is needed to lead to that level of dehumanization. And now we're finally at the point where a lot of mainstream media is starting to turn when it comes to Israel and Gaza, because just the level of cruelty it genuinely is generational. Like people are going to be talking about this for years.
Yeah, there's no hiding it anymore.
But it took a really, really long time for that media to get there. It's because it's so bad that some of them are realizing that, sure, yeah, when all of the books about this are written, people are going to look back at all of us. They're going to ask, what did you do? And they're going to look at the media outlets and they're going to start accusing people. And I think it's because of that some mainstream media outlets are finally just being like, well, we really should, take a look at what's going on in Gaza. And it's just kind of like, it's been a year and a half. Like, it's been longer than that. You guys manufactured the dehumanization that led to this cruelty. And now all of a sudden you're just like, oh, well, we're going to let this one Palestinian person have like a op-ed here.
Yeah, I think I've been seeing that start to break with the American media for the past couple of weeks. I saw a nice article about trans people in the New York Times for the first time in like 3 years too. And I was like, okay, I don't know what's happening over the New York Times.
What?
Right?
Holy shit.
Yeah, but it's like they're finally being like, wait, we backed the wrong fucking horse on this one.
Oh my God.
Have you
ever listened to the episodes of Behind the Bastards on how the liberal media manufactured fascism or whatever it was?
Oh, yeah.
I think it was the newspapers. Yeah. Yeah, that was a really interesting episode for me.
Yeah.
I think that was a few months ago that I listened to it as the election was happening. And I was just going, oh, no.
Yeah. And that's also like something that like when we did the other interview, we talked to David Livingstone Smith about. He introduced a concept to me that I haven't heard people bring up before. Like I knew about the idea. He was talking about how, it is like media, but it's also like authority figures in your life. And so he kind of classified them broadly as like epistemic authorities, like the people that you go to or listen to. And that could be political figures. It could be your doctor. It could be, whoever you turn to help you sort out the truth, because you have to turn to authorities in your life. Like ultimately you can't know everything. You have to have, some kind of way to search for information. And like, sadly, that means like you end up having to engage in like serious trust with people. That's just how it's going to work. And sometimes people, of course, exploit that kind of truth. Do you feel like what we know to be the U.S. will survive this experience, or will this turn, into some other kind of thing, either through, balkanization or accidentally nuking ourselves off the face of the planet or whatever else?
I think that's being determined as we speak. I wouldn't place a bet either way. I genuinely think that we are in a deep moment of crisis, at a bifurcation in terms of where this country is. There's a scenario in which this fascism keeps rising. There's less and less opposition by Dems, especially in terms of like leadership really pushing down on progressives who are trying to do the right thing right now. And it could actually get not just worse, but deeply entrenched. There is also a path, in which there's enough resistance, enough grassroots resistance to eventually push out the folks in Dem leadership that are in the way, and that energizes people. And I do think that there's potential for that. Just on immigration, for example, obviously as someone who's an immigrant himself and an activist, I am not optimistic about the situation in general. But one of the few pieces of optimism that I have is that despite the fact that I still believe democratic leadership is like nowhere to be found or largely collaborating, at the grassroots, people have been showing up left and right. People are showing up to know your rights training, community defense, mutual aid, doing all of the things. Like, the people that I would consider the Dem base are coming out of the woodworks. If anything, that's escalating. There are more and more videos that are coming out of just regular citizens, and I love it, by the way, pulling up on ICE cars that are like surveilling people and just being like, what are you doing here? At the grassroots, people are getting really fed up. And what I'm saying is that the energy is there. And this actually goes back to what you were saying about sort of people looking to leaders, that it's not just intellectually, but just in general, people are looking for voices that give them permission to like push back and fight against all of it. It's just that we are at a moment right now. It's like this sliding doors moment, where we could go either way. It could get either extremely bad or people are going to wake up. Now, I do think that some of the things that Trump has been achieving in terms of some of the institutions that he's destroying, I'm not particularly optimistic that we're going to be able to get some of them back, because one of the things you learn pretty early on as an activist is that it is a piece of cake to get rid of an institution, and it takes a long time to build it back up. And there are all sorts of things that are shifting. I do think that we are probably in the midst of the American decline. I mean, Trump and his tariffs, he is doing everything he can right now to basically destroy the faith and credit of like the dollar. I mean, as soon as all of this stuff came out, I was just like, man, Trump is just giving China a gift.
Yeah.
Because obviously for the longest time, it's been this competition between, the US and China, who's going to be the biggest superpower. And I do think that he's doing so much damage that I don't know if we're going to be able to get back to it, especially if this continues. I actually don't have the answer, but I do think that the answer exists in what we do now. It exists in action, not in theory. It could just genuinely go either way. So.
Yeah. I like that you used the word bifurcation. I guess one of the things that I don't talk about on here that much is my actual academic background in chemical engineering, but I'm very specifically interested in nonlinear dynamics and chaos theory, in reaction systems that have what they call bifurcations and unstable equilibria. And like, I've been using the term unstable equilibria a lot lately to refer to like what the US has been in, these things like USGS and NSF, NIH and NIST, and like these government agencies that people actually don't talk about very much. I'm like, oh, these maintain a level of equilibrium that like, and especially like USAID, like that maintains a sort of global equilibrium. It's like a helicopter. You fuck with one part and the whole thing just absolutely falls to shit. And that's sort of what the US has been for a long time. We've been in this unstable equilibrium, but the second you push it to one direction, it's going to fly off. I think the American system wasn't designed to build institutions. It was designed for gridlock, to work slowly. A lot of that has to do with, one, like how people were seeing other revolutions going on at the time, like especially like the oncoming French Revolution, where it went from, we cut off a few heads to like, we cut off everyone's head very quickly. And people had that reaction of, oh, let's make sure that our political system is built for gridlock so that we don't do that so often. And like, of course, that's, largely rich people at the time trying to entrench their own power. But I guess, there's merits to that kind of thing. But at the same time, it makes it so that like when a Republican wants to rule by executive force, use executive orders to do everything, it's very simple to repeal things. And it is very hard to build things. So like, when, Obama trying to enact DACA through executive fiat, like DACA is a good thing. Obviously, it is a shortcoming version of what is ultimately should be a better thing and should be the actual thing that we do. But this is something that will be fairly popular, fairly innocuous. Like, I think a lot of Americans still are good with DACA. Like, if you bring that up to them on its own, if you start talking about deportation, like Republicans have their own ideas, but as soon as you start talking about like the minute details of things, they start to be like, oh, okay, like that I'm okay with, that I'm okay with.
I absolutely remember when it was passed. I celebrated because of how long it took to get there, but it was such a bare minimum. I termed it the golden shackles,
Yeah.
Because I was just like, oh, all this is basically like a temporary work program that you have to pay into, and that someone could get rid of any moment. at any moment. And sadly, at the federal level, like that's one of the biggest things that the immigration reform was able to achieve. And now it's just like it's in the background, it's on its way out. Yeah, we've been building to all of this for a very long time. And I think that's one of the things that's complicated in terms of the immigration conversation on this issue. Telling people, yes, this is worse, and I've been doing this for at least 15 years, longer than that, really. But it doesn't come out of nowhere. We've been building to this level of like xenophobic, mania. And absolutely both parties contributed to it. During the Harris election in 2024, every immigrant organizer that I respected was basically ready for more arrests and more incarceration and more deportations, regardless of who was in office. By then, the Democratic Party had already started moving so far to the right that like most immigrant organizers were just like, even if we get Harris, we're going to have to fight that administration. They're talking like very tough on immigration. They're going to be doing more restricting, more incarceration. Trump was the worst case scenario, but there was no illusion, that like Harris was going to come in and like, open the cages and free the migrants. It was quite the opposite.
Yeah. I think Harris would have been an easier fight, but none of this would have been even, on any particular issue, on fracking, even like, she, had gone back on that. On trans issues, She refused to actually answer. She's like, I would follow the law. And it's like, well, that's not even a real answer. Like, what does that even fucking mean?
Even though the folks who are at the center of Democratic Party power and politics, as you know, they're saying that one of the major reasons that Harris lost is because she just kept talking about the trans issue. And I was just like, what are you talking about?
What are you talking about? She wouldn't even say the word.
Absolutely a load of bullshit. Yeah.
Right. Paid very close attention to this. She nothing. And so that's when you know that the folks in power, they're not all fully on the up and up when they're giving us their excuses for why Harris lost. That is just not born out of the evidence. They're just making excuses for the fact that that party just, honestly doesn't know what it's been doing. But that is infuriating. And a lot of us called it. I mean, I certainly absolutely remember thinking they're going to lose this. They're going to blame this on immigrants. They're going to blame this on leftists. They're going to blame this on queer folks, especially trans folks. It was an easy script to see in advance. And that's exactly what they've done. It's wild.
Yeah, I am glad that I'm seeing some people within the party pushing back. And I think it's interesting that like, so the polls show that like people don't have very much faith in the Democratic Party, which is totally reasonable. Like when you think about like the party as itself, people think about like the DNC, they think about the power structures. If you ask about specific politicians, though, some of them remain quite popular, like AOC, Bernie, some folks that are off on the progressive side, and even, some folks like Pete Buttigieg still have like a decent popularity with Americans. And I think that's interesting. I saw something today where they're like, oh, we'll get like Matt Iglesias and these other folks to like look at, what went wrong. And it's like, well, that's not exactly the people that I would choose. I would choose the people in the Democratic Party that poll well, like Tim Walz and AOC and Bernie, and say, okay, like, what's your vision? Because like you guys are actually popular. If you want popular policy, those are some folks to go to. People actually like those people because of policy reasons, not even really personal reasons. I think it's interesting that, somebody finally broke into the DNC. I've been saying for years, there's two options forward. Like you either get people to build a third party, which is quite complicated. Nobody really wants to do the very unsexy work of that because it is a lot of paperwork and it's a lot of bullshit. And a lot of the folks that I've met that have been in third parties, including like PSL and the Green Party, don't know civics that well. I had to explain federal supremacy to someone recently who's involved in that kind of thing. And I was like, I shouldn't have to tell you this. Like you're part of one of the larger minor parties. Why the fuck don't you know about federal supremacy? I don't want to explain the Constitution to anybody. Seeing David Hogg, though, get into the DNC and be like, I'm going to run people against all these incumbents. I'm like, fuck yeah, dude, that's great. Yeah. Like that's a good change.
Infiltrating is an excellent strategy. Zoran is doing really good too.
Yeah, a lot better than I thought.
Yeah, I didn't think he was going to do that well. And when I saw Cuomo running, I was like, oh, fuck. It turns out that Zoran's holding his own. Like I was actually really impressed.
The DSA out of New York City knows a lot about running this kind of a situation.
For sure. And like open secret is finally out that I'm like working on the campaign with Kat Abou-Ghazaleh, but like she's also somebody who came from this it's finally like it's less of an open secret now. It's been said online, so I could say it. You know, I helped write her healthcare policies and was happy to do so because I knew her from when she was working at Media Matters. She came out of that swinging, and she's probably the only person that really frustrated the shit out of Tucker Carlson in his entire life. I wouldn't be surprised if a lot of her work was part of what led him to be fired from Fox. Obviously, like the Dominion lawsuit was like a really big part of that. Him getting caught basically saying, I like our audience, but they're fucking rubes in the discovery there. Like, of course, that's part of what did it. But her work with Media Matters, she was the Tucker Carlson person. Her job was just watch Tucker Carlson, critique Tucker Carlson. That's the whole fucking job. And like Elon Musk, sued Media Matters, and it brought a lot of people out of there. But I feel like he, Obi-Wan Kenobi'd her. Like she ended up like a bit more powerful at the end of the whole thing. And, she
have to defeat me, only made me more powerful.
Yeah. 26 years old. She's a Palestinian American. I'm like, fuck yeah, this is great. Of course, I'm going to help her write policy stuff. I think that there's something there. There's a seed of something. And she's, not nearly one of the only young progressives, young leftists like running on a good platform. So, that's exciting. But let's do one last question before we go, and I'll let V take this one.
This is the problem with drinking tea with milk in it before you start reading a question.
Yeah, you got to drink stuff with lemon in it.
On the same line of thought, we've always been advocates for trying to engage people who might not know some of this stuff, and also for trying to genuinely change the minds of people who may have abhorrent or irrational views. This is a two-part question on that. One, do you feel like that we can bring some of those people back from the grips of really dark ideologies in any reliable way? And two, if you felt like that you could and you wanted to change those people's minds, what would you show them or tell them?
Yeah, no, I mean, obviously, that's organizing. Like, if organizing was simple, we would only be talking to people who have our beliefs, that's the challenge. In fact, I'll even give you a specific story about that. The first year that I tried to organize on immigration specifically, and this was probably in the mid-2000s, before I had become more public about my status and everything. I was an awful organizer because I was very self-righteous and very self-focused. And so whenever someone would say something anti-immigrant, I would be like super reactive, and I'd get in their faces and just be like, oh yeah, well, you're illegal, ho, 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 or whatever. And then by the end of the year, I looked around my organizing table and I was just like, oh, it's just me and like my 10 acolytes. And we're just talking to each other about immigration. It's completely unhelpful. And I realized because I had so much anger and passion on the issue of immigration that that's actually where mental health counseling really helped. Counseling was the space where I could just kind of vent about all the stuff that I was hearing and everything. But in an organizing space, I cannot be reactive, because in an organizing space, you actually want to welcome the people who have the least amount in common with you in terms of their ideology, and then engage in a dialogue. Now, one of the things that you easily find out, and that's true about MAGA or anyone that you're going to be talking about, is that when you're dealing with a group of folks who have different ideology than you do have to realize that some of them you're just not going to be able to change. Like with MAGA, I do think that there are a certain number of people who are, you want to use whatever parlance, they're in the cult or whatever, you're just not going to be able to get them. But I absolutely believe, and I don't think that I would do any organizing if I didn't believe that there's a tremendous number of these folks that we can get. Part of that is many of them obviously didn't quite fully understand what they were signing on to. And when it comes to MAGA, for example, you're talking about the second part of the question, what do you tell those folks, right? With MAGA, it's actually slightly easier, because despite the fact that there is this cult-like aspect where there are some people who are just basically going to go with whatever Trump wants to go with, because he is sort of a bumbling fascist, he's just doing stuff and he doesn't really care who it's going to affect. The thing that the Democratic Party really should be ashamed of is the fact that in this last election, the Republican Party won the working class. That's depressing. But the flip side of that is that all of this stuff that's in the big, beautiful bill, that's being debated right now, all these cuts to Medicaid, all of that, we're talking about potentially a minimum of 8 to 9 million people losing access to all sorts of social services. Obviously, many of those folks are working class. They're in MAGA. They're going to get it. And we're already seeing it. I mean, you're seeing like in some of these like deep red districts. If you want to do something kind of fun for your mental health, check out some of the video coming out of these town halls. I mean, you have like red Republicans, but working class Republicans screaming at Republican representative using phrases like tax the rich.
Yeah.
Like, and it's not just this one-off. It's happened numerous times. So when you have the Republican working class so angry at this bill that they're saying things like tax the rich, like that is an invitation for organizers. And if anything, this to me, you know, I hate to sort of go back to my critiques of the Democratic Party, but like I've been a grassroots activist most of my life. I know so many grassroots organizers. I talk with them all the time. Every single one of them is just like, this is the most perfect environment to organize on. Like every single issue, there is easy messaging that you can work with. And one of the things that is driving us insane is watching the Democratic Party just like looking at the polls and just being like, I don't know what we should be doing. All while Sanders and AOC are literally filling up stadiums full of people talking about F the oligarchy.
Yeah.
Like there are a lot of people we could get, you know, if leadership of that party sort of woke up about it. But just in general, as an organizing principle, like as awful as things are, it's precisely because things are so awful that the organizing situation is even better. I mean, I'll even let you in on a little secret, which is that as there have been obstacles to Trump's tariff craziness, every time there's an obstacle, I'm just like, no, just let him cook even longer, because the more pain is inflicted, the more that pain is going to trickle down to MAGA folks, and they're going to be way more open to conversations about getting out of the cult or whatever it is. So we have this perfect environment right now in terms of organizing.
Yeah, I fully agree with that. I feel like it's with the tariffs, it's one of those things where I'm like, okay, like, yes, I don't like that this will be painful for anyone, but I'm also, and I'm not, you know, somebody that has like accelerationist viewpoints. I don't necessarily like agree with the idea of immiseration, but at some point it's like these folks are going to make themselves and everyone else miserable, and you kind of have to let them like you have to let them figure out, you know, if your kid is intent on touching the fucking stove, at some point you got to be like, fine, touch the stove. Touch the stove. Like, you can't pull their hands away forever, especially if they slap you every time they do. You know, you have to just let them touch the hot coils at some point. And this is that time in history. And it sucks, but yeah, I have been loving those videos, watching people scream at them.
Every time I have a bad day, I watch those.
But even the one, you know, the other night where people are like, oh, people are going to die because of Medicare cuts. And she's just like, I don't remember even who it was, Joni Ernst, I think. And she's
Ernst,
like,
yeah.
oh, everybody dies. Put that on a fucking t-shirt, man. Like that's a wrap for her career. Like, fuck it, you know what? I'm putting it on a t-shirt.
Just go with the Tim Walz thing, you know? Like,
well, you know what? We are going to release a Crumbling t-shirt
something
with Joni Ernst saying
everyone
dies. We're doing it.
Go.
Absolutely.
We're doing it.
There we go.
I'm going to try to get it done by the time this episode comes out.
That's great.
All right. Beautiful.
All right.
That is wonderful.
So we're going to go to our Patreon exclusive stuff. But before we do that, for, you know, all of our listeners who, you know, are listening on Spotify, YouTube, whatever other platforms, anything you want to plug, anything you want to tell them about, websites, cool shit?
Yeah, I mean, I would just say that in the immigration situation, I hope it's clear from this conversation that I do not expect the Dems to kind of wake up anytime soon. But I do want to encourage people to really get involved, because right now it's hopping at the grassroots, and it is the thing that is making a difference. Like, we have been able to stop deportations, family separations, all of that, because people have shown up, especially U.S. citizens. There are tons of organizations, you know, to support. You know, I'm with a group called the Immigrant Justice Network. I always try to rep the Black migrant groups like the Undocu-Black Network, the Black Alliance for Just Immigration. There are all sorts of groups you can follow, but honestly, given how widespread this assault on immigrants are, the odds are that wherever you are, there's a group that is doing immigration support. And I would just encourage you to do that because, like I said, right now it is grassroots work is the most effective. We're not getting any positive legislation anytime soon. But what we can do is at the very least minimize the pain and protect some people who are under deep assault right now. So I definitely encourage folks to just get involved precisely because I'm not seeing like a lot of institutional pushback just yet. So it's really up to people now. So
yeah. Well, thank you so much for joining us, and we'll be right back with crumbs for other people that are listening, and for all of those immigrant orgs on DocuBlack Network, the Black Alliance for Just Immigration, and for the Immigrant Justice Network. We will have links to those in our show notes. So if you're listening and you want to check those out, please go to the show notes.
Wonderful.
Bye.